We are talking Dark Age from 1987, and this is an Australian creature feature giant crocodile movie that stars John Jarratt, a down under horror icon, although I always want to say Jeff Jarratt whenever I review a film with him in it. So Dark Age is a kind of one of these movies that came out in the wake of Jaws, even though this was obviously some years later, that is a kind of creature on the loose movie. And these were very popular after Jaws, and in some ways continue to be so. And this movie follows broadly a kind of similar template to the Jaws movie. We have this kind of small Australian community, which is a mixture of kind of Aboriginal people along with kind of your more modern Australian kind of populace. And because of the kind of the high rain season, it's got this giant crocodile which is going into an area which it wouldn't normally go into. It ends up kind of killing a bunch of people, and we have this kind of spiritual connection from the Aboriginal people to this kind of crocodile, who kind of somewhat worship it to a certain degree. But of course, other people kind of want to get rid of it and kill it. But our main character, Steve Harris, played by Jarratt, is this kind of conservationist who wants to kind of stop the crocodile, but really not kill it, and just try and maybe take it somewhere else where it can't hurt anyone, because it's such a kind of like rare example of such a large crocodile. I think they say it's 25 feet long in this movie, which is the same length that the Bruce from Jaws was. So that's your kind of your setup, and obviously we have variety of kind of people, these kind of angry locals who want to kind of kill the crocodile. We've got, of course, the mayor who wants to kind of get this kind of condominium built by Japanese investors, so he just kind of wants rid of it and things like this. So what will happen? You'll have to watch the movie and find out. So let's discuss what I think works in this movie. So like I said, it kind of broadly, at least, has a similar plot to the movie Jaws. It's kind of an out-of-control, extra-large creature killing kind of local populace, and it's up to kind of one man to try and kind of put a stop to it whilst getting pressure from the local officials. So if you like that kind of movie, this is, again, it follows that that sort of pattern. And being a 1987 film, obviously the kind of effects here are practical. There's a little bit of stock footage, but for the most part it's kind of a practical, fully, full-size kind of puppet, and we do see a reasonable amount of it. And I've got to say, we do see a reasonable amount of tax, and we see the kind of, the jaws kind of clamp down on people. It's not one of these movies where you have a kind of creature attacking the water and all you sort of see is splashing like a lot of kind of low-budget shark movies do. This movie even kills a young child at one point, which is probably the most sort of shocking scene in the movie. So, there's, we get some good sort of wide-angle shots that kind of show the kind of the size of this kind of movie. And it's interesting, I think, as well, to have these different perspectives about what to do with it. The Aboriginal people and their kind of connection to it and kind of what it means in their kind of history. Jarratt and his kind of small team of people want to kind of like, want to study it, and they understand it has to be kind of be dealt with, but ultimately want to try and find a more humane way, because that's kind of the way they are. Then we've got the kind of the angry locals who just want to kill it, and the kind of the stuffy officials and the kind of the bureaucrats just want the problem dealt with because all they care about is the bottom line. So, we have a kind of a mixture of opinions, and that's the one thing this movie does have, which the maybe Jaws doesn't, is that kind of connection to these kind of the Aboriginal people, which kind of gives this movie a little bit of a unique flavour. And then there's a couple of kind of actors here that have Aboriginal actors that have a relatively kind of large parts in the movie. Despite this, I wouldn't exactly say this is a kind of like high octane action kind of horror. But nonetheless, I still feel the movie is quite well paced. I mean, we get every so often you won't be waiting too long until there's kind of an attack by this kind of crocodile. And I've got to say, in certain scenes, you know, I think it's filmed pretty well, especially when you can consider the time this was made, the kind of the relatively kind of low budget, and particularly where we just kind of see the kind of stalking, and then it kind of slowly just disappears under the kind of the water. And there's a couple of sequences with, I think, have pretty good cinematography where it kind of uses light. I mean, the puppet that they use, the model, isn't brilliant, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But there are some sequences where I feel it's lit to be quite effective, especially when it's kind of like, you know, dimly kind of lit, things like that. You know, you kind of, at that point it kind of feels pretty threatening, I have to say. And there are some kind of effects here that I kind of appreciated. I mean, we get these kind of, the locals just go on a kind of a crocodile kind of rampage and end up just shotgunning loads of crocodiles. They've kind of like, they have exploding crocodile puppets where they're kind of like taking a shotgun to the head and stuff. So, you know, it has this kind of like this certain bloodthirsty kind of quality to a certain degree, even though I wouldn't say this is a particularly kind of gory movie in any way. It's quite funny as well at certain times. I mean, if you're familiar with kind of Australian kind of culture, it's very much this kind of like this sort of man, like kind of like man's man kind of culture that a lot of these kind of locals exhibit, and they're kind of constantly kind of drinking Castlemaine 4X, even when they're kind of like getting attacked by the you know, the creature, they're still holding cans of beer and things like this. And you know, it's very much, they're just like slobs and things like this. So it has these kind of like, it's not really a horror comedy in any way, but there are a couple of like comedic sort of touches. And I gotta say, I think John Jarratt is always pretty watchable. You know, he's had a long career at this point, and I gotta say he's quite a charismatic actor, which is why I think he's, you know, done so much in kind of horror movies, because he has that sort of kind of an everyman kind of feel, but quite sort of you know, relatable kind of sense that I thought was good. So what doesn't work? I mean, let's talk about the actual crocodile itself. I mean, this is a kind of a lower budget movie as far as I can tell. I mean, it's not a bottom of the barrel movie, but the puppet doesn't look great. I mean, I was reading, they've had a lot of those same problems that they had with the original Jaws movie. For example, you know, it's a mechanical contraption in some scenes, and it just didn't work very well. And unlike Jaws, the crocodile can kind of walk on land, and it looks very kind of robotic when you have these kind of like these legs kind of like moving around. So I think this this crocodile doesn't look good in a lot of its scenes. Like I said, there are a couple where it's somewhat obscured by the kind of the darkness and kind of like, you know, it's only partially, you know, kind of viewed and things like that, where I think it's effective. But a lot of the time, especially when we see it all in its kind of glory, it really does look kind of quite like a puppet, to be honest with you. If you do compare this movie to Jaws, you can kind of see where this one kind of falls short. It doesn't quite have that sort of tension that Jaws so expertly crafted. You know, you don't really get that sort of creeping dread that this thing is just this kind of unknown killer that can pop out anywhere. I mean, there's elements of it maybe that pop up here and there, but it never really feels all that tense for the most part. It doesn't help that the kind of soundtrack here is very kind of like pithy and kind of like not particularly kind of helpful to the kind of the subject matter. And the other thing, of course, Jaws is famous for are these kind of very rich characters. And although I like Jarratt's performance, I think it makes a likeable leading man, he isn't particularly kind of like a well-drawn character or anything like that. And the supporting cast are relatively kind of, you know, just stock characters to a certain degree. And that is where, if you compare it to a similar film like Jaws, you can kind of really see where that movie, i.e. Jaws, elevates the material so much. It's, you know, I don't think story-wise, it does nothing too interesting. Ultimately, it's very much a kind of like paint by numbers, you know, creature on the loose. It has that Aboriginal kind of aspect to it with that thing. But I gotta say, you know, it comes across as a little bit like that kind of like, oh, the wise old kind of like Aboriginal, the wise old kind of native people. And it's another one of these tropes. I mean, this is an earlier, you know, 87 movie, but it's one of these things you quite often see in films like, you know, the wise old kind of native person kind of like, they know more than they're kind of letting on, and they have this sort of connection to it and stuff like that. But I didn't really feel it had much impact on the actual story. I mean, it was an interesting idea, but it wasn't like it really factored into anything that happened in the actual plot outside of having support for not killing this crocodile. But John Jarratt never wanted to in the first place anyway. So, you know, I felt it was introduced, but it didn't maybe go as far as it could have done. Some of the acting isn't the best. Some of it is a little kind of like ropey at times. Some of the supporting characters, I say Jarratt I think is fine. His kind of love interest I don't think really adds much to the kind of the story. It's just a kind of a female lead to have a female lead. I don't think it usually has much to do, to be honest with you. And, you know, it's reasonably predictable. So overall, I think it is a fun movie. I enjoyed it, but it's nothing really outstanding in any way. You know, it maybe could have lent into a bit more of a gore to kind of make it a little bit more visceral. I mean, you get kind of a couple of kind of like hero shots, but all you really ever see is a little bit of kind of blood. There's one prosthetic arm and things like this. So it's not a particularly kind of like shocking film in the violence really, but it could have been, you know, especially when we see a couple of the attacks. It's, you know, or it's kind of gone on to more of a goofy side. It's very much like middle of the road to me. It's not a bad film. I enjoyed watching it. I'd seen it before, obviously on VHS, and I've watched it now for this review. You know, I liked it fine, but it's nothing that really kind of I think is a must watch. But certainly it's certainly watchable. I'll give it a 5 out of 10. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Leave me a comment, and I'll look forward to seeing you next time.